Okay, so our second last panel for the afternoon, we're going to talk about digital ethics and how it's going to shape with blockchains and digital organizations in mind. So without further ado, please welcome Rhys Lindmark from the MIT Media Lab, DCI, Shiv from Streamer, we have Zuko from Zcash Foundation, we have Shira from Maiden, and Bill from Minds.
Yeah, that's you. You can. Beautiful. Hello. Okay. Hello, people over here. Nice kiss. Hello, people over there. Hope everybody's doing well. So we're here to talk about digital ethics, which we're all very passionate about, and which I think a lot of the people in the audience are passionate about. And so let's just get things started off first and say who you are, your name, and then also like why you're passionate about digital ethics, but like a very quick kind of 30-second snip. So I'm Rhys, and I'm passionate about digital ethics because I think the intersection of technology and like society is very fascinating and very important. So that's me.
I'm Shiv Malik from Streamer. I used to be an investigative journalist for The Guardian, and I kind of fell into this rabbit hole about a year and a half ago, mainly because I was interested in digital cooperatives. So that's what brings me into the digital ethical space as well.
Hello, I'm Shira, and I'm the co-founder of Maiden. We work on global user research. I came from the political world, and I think personally I've been really passionate about ethics from the very early on, partly because I've seen how wrong it can go. And I think the example of Israel in my lifetime and, my grandparents escaping Nazi Germany, founding a country, suddenly becoming occupiers, that kind of thing is what led me to say, oh crap, with all this power and technology, where might it lead?
My name is Bill Ottman. I'm the co-founder of Minds. And I just got obsessed with free and open source software and privacy and how those sort of coil together and are like a paradox, but sort of both necessary. So, yeah. And how open source enables global collaboration.
My name is Zuko, and I'm one of the founders of Zcash. And I got into digital ethics because my idea of ethics is more outcome-oriented or consequence-oriented rather than like principle-oriented. And the digital technology is having more and more of the biggest consequences on our whole society nowadays.
Great. So just to reflect back some of that, Zuko's talking about a big difference from an ethical perspective of consequentialism or utilitarianism, which is like the outcome focus, versus something like deontology or virtue ethics, which is more kind of means focused. And then I also want to reflect, Shiv was talking about the platform cooperatives, and earlier on the Future of Work panel, Nathan Schneider is one of the like starters of platform cooperatives. Shira is talking about, I think that yours is an interesting piece with like the kind of more macro take on like global governance and how the people who once had less power then get more power. And then Bill's talking about for me, the thing that we're going to talk about a bit, which is this privacy, transparency. And you should think about these things as like a tension, a balance, a co-evolution, how they relate to each other. So just a little reflection there. I think before we talk about like technology though, let's talk about ethics. So how do you all think about ethics totally removed from technology?
I think about it in terms of freedom of information and sort of mutual respect of the applications that in terms of digital ethics, the applications that you're interacting with, if they're not...
Whoa. Not allowed. Ethics. What do you think?
I'll take that.
Sorry.
Just give you a moment to think.
Because he was saying he didn't want to hear about the technology yet. He wanted to talk about the ethics without the technology. That's why you got buzzed.
That's why you got punished. It's true.
Understood.
Sorry, Bill.
All right, I'll just take a quick stab. I think ethics is deeply relational, and I think ethics is about kind of the study and practice of how to not cause harm.
I'd second that. I think what's informed me is kind of, and this is almost from being a journalist, like you look and view the world and try and figure out what problems there are. And then, all these things are usually in balance. So, you have libertarianism as a set of ideals of which freedom of speech and transparency are paramount. Then you have, I would situate myself more on the left side of the political spectrum, where, conversations around equality and equality are what's important. And, again, just looking at the world, trying to figure out what problems there are, and then trying to figure out, again, how ethically you could create different structures is how I go about it.
Any other bonus thoughts?
The way I think about ethics is respecting other people's choices, like their freedom to choose in a way that you might not, and taking responsibility for your own choices.
Yep. And then how or go, sure.
Oh, I was just curious, by responsibility, which is a word I love, but I feel like we don't talk about a lot in this space. What does that mean, responsibility for your own choices based on their actions as related to you or the system or others?
Yeah, I deliberately didn't try to explain that because I'm not sure how to qualify that. But it feels really core, right? You like taking responsibility for your actions is really core, except I don't really know how to measure it.
Key question, I would say, for this panel and our community.
Yeah, and let me push back on or explore further another part of your answer there, Zuko, which is the letting others kind of do them, the kind of do you mindset. How do you think about what happens when you let other people do them, and then it has externalities on you or it impacts you? How do you think about that side of things?
It's sort of like the non-aggression principle comes into things, and ethics is very subjective. So, what's ethical to one person, one side of the spectrum is the opposite to the other. So ultimately freedom, but at the same time not overstepping.
I mean, you can see maybe bringing it almost back to the technological side of things. You can see that, I don't know, I think I could see that ethical transformation within the Ethereum community itself. Like, I don't know, maybe people disagree with this, but like 3 years ago, it was, quite high libertarian in its makeup in terms of people. It's about privacy and that being incredibly core, perhaps also transparency and leave me alone, right? And I don't want anyone else telling me what to do. And I don't think anyone would necessarily describe the Ethereum space that way now. Like, there's a whole load of other people with other sets of ethical considerations and other perspectives and ideologies that have entered into this and has diluted the libertarian thing, whereas Bitcoiners still remain high libertarians, right?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I think and it's just worth asking this for yourselves as the audience to say, just totally remove from the technology that you're thinking about, how do I think about ethics in general, and then now start to apply it to the digital ethics in this digital world that we live in. So, and I guess, Bill, I want to ask you specifically at the start, we were thinking about how open source software relates to ethics. And I think Bill makes the relatively strong claim that says, hey, open source software might be either necessary for this, or perhaps the incentive models might be necessary for this. So tell us how you think about ethics and its overlap with open source software.
It's also, there's open source in the sense of software, but also information in general. So it sort of transcends physical and digital. But, and then there's also a distinction between free software and open source software, which, if Stallman were up here, he would be freaking out because we're conflating the two. And free software being, sort of the hyper-ethical to him, open source being apolitical. So, but one is more free depending on your definition.
The problem with, in a sense, the free bit of FOSS, right, free open source, is that hasn't it sort of been a failure, right? I mean, this is why we're, in a sense, isn't that why, 2017 happened and utility tokens have happened? You're like, oh, finally we can create incentives for people to do this, because it turns out free isn't good enough. Like, just relying on altruism, won't get you that far, because people give up. They're like, oh yeah, I don't want to do this anymore because I'm not getting paid. I have to make my way in the world, right?
Yeah, I just want to relate this back to your earlier question, because I think the idea that ethics is somehow an absolute truth, which I don't think any of us believe. I didn't hear that. But yet, when we have these values we deeply hold, like free or open or transparent or privacy, all of a sudden, we just think, well, it's open, so it must be great. The truth is, open isn't neutral, right? There's a whole world of power dynamics outside of crypto that are existing, and we don't negate them just by being open. So I think I think this is a really hard tension for anyone, but certainly those of us in this space who are really deep idealists and hold these profound values. I don't think open is neutral, and I think we have to really, really grapple with that.
In a sense, maybe this is a question for the rest of the panel, and I'm now doing your bit. Sorry, that's it. I feel awkward now.
He's a journalist.
You can ask, and then Rhys can be one of the answerers.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
We've deconstructed the panel.
Which is, look, for me, the ethical consideration in being open is that people, the code is transparent, right? It's like, okay, look, and like post Snowden, and I was in the Guardian at the time that Snowden broke. It was like fascinating, right? It was so strange because people are like, the day before, if you'd told someone, look, actually all these government agencies are entirely spying on you and this is what they do, they would literally like wrapped you in foil and like called you a nutter. You're like, get out, you crazy person. The day after, though...
I was that guy.
Right. The day after, though, everyone was like, yeah, sure, of course the government does that. Like, we knew that all along. It's like, hang on, where was the bit in the middle where we like, get out on the streets, protest, or like, none of that happened. It was so strange. But to come back to the open part, it's like, okay, here's a way of like being transparent, right? But what more is there to that, right? It's like, I mean, that would be my question. What more do you find in the transparency of code and saying, look, there aren't any backdoors in this, you can check it yourself?
Yeah, what's the question?
What more is there in being open source from an ethical perspective, except to say where what we do is transparent?
So it helps prevent backdoors, which I think are unethical. And it additionally empowers people to get more choice. If you don't have if your software isn't open, then people only get the binary choice of do they like delete Facebook, or are they stuck with whatever it is that Facebook does. Whereas if you instead had an open platform, they would get a lot more fine-grained decisions about what they will and won't engage in.
Yeah, I think you can imagine this from the voice and exit framework, where you say, if you're ever in a system and you don't like that system, you can either express voice within that system and say, I don't like this anymore, or you can exit that system. I think what Zuko is saying is when something's totally transparent, then you are allowed to express more voice within the system because you know more about the system itself. And your exits don't just need to be like, I'm just going to leave Facebook and never do it. Maybe you can fork the Facebook code and create some new kind of community or whatever.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be great?
No, it is great. I'm not sure it's more of a... I guess it is an ethical consideration in the sense that you put the person first and their choices first. You're elevating that above the right, and you're making that an architecture. You're building that into the architecture. I get that, but I'm not sure. I mean, in a sense, I don't think that's necessarily proven as like a high ethical choice for other people out there. Largely because we don't have that many open systems on a mass scale that end users or regular consumers like actually like if Facebook was an open system, would people actually leave given what they know now? I still doubt it, right? That's the interesting thing. So like, are we premising are we putting that too high up the ethical consideration scale when actually there's other things to worry about?
It's just a step in the right direction. So, just because it's open, like you're saying, doesn't mean that it is good, but that would be a positive movement.
Is that enough, though? Like,
No,
I would say,
no.
But I think we do kind of get into a trap of feeling like that's enough because it's a really hard step to take in and of itself to create secure, open, transparent global systems, right?
Yeah, it's like a full-time job.
Like a mega, yeah. Really? So that's hard enough. But I think this notion of choice and consequence, which you brought up, Zuko, and I agree it's really hard, like, to figure out how to measurably take responsibility for all the consequences of our actions, both positive and negative. That said, that still may be the framework of ethics that we need to grapple with, which is that there are a multitude of choices. They will all have consequences. They will have consequences for me, for others, for the system, which will then again have consequences for me. And we need to account for both the choices and the multitude of them that there are and the potential consequences. And even beginning to talk about things in that way, I think that would be the right first step, in addition to the other steps we're taking.
Ethical training for everybody. Yeah, I think so. And just to reflect back some things, when you're thinking about impact, doing good things is good, but if you want to like maximize your impact, you have to start thinking, okay, from a maximalist perspective, how can I maximize something here? And there's like this weird consequentialist framework called effective altruism that's all about like maximizing impact. I also want to talk about on the open source side, it's a very awkward, I mean, in the cryptocurrency community, there was this project called Grin. One of their main developers was just trying to raise some money to develop code, and like no one was giving him the money, and it was very sad. And so this is to Shiv's point. It was like, man, and that's why these token models might unlock some of these new incentive systems that we're excited about. And then finally, an awkward piece of all of it, which was Bill was saying earlier, is that when you have something like code in bits, those things can be distributed with zero marginal cost. Which makes it awkward because you're like, okay, I want this MP3. Why am I paying a bunch of money for it when it costs essentially $0 from a marginal perspective to get it? And so when you get to zero in a bunch of economic equations, it kind of makes things awkward. So be aware of that as well.
If you're asking for money from people who will only give you the money if you keep the code secret, you're talking to the wrong people. You don't even want to be involved with those people. I mean, we know with just WordPress, Docker, so many amazing open source projects that are making lots of money, and they leverage AGPL v3 to help do that.
Yeah, those all the open source software licenses. So a question that I have here, we've been talking a lot about, I think in general we've been talking about like the systems themselves as like how can we make good systems, what about zero marginal cost, how do we think about freeness and open sourceness. I want to talk about like the human side as well and think about like how should we think about the people who are building these systems, and whether we're thinking about identity, whether we're thinking about diversity and inclusion, whether we're thinking about the kinds of people that we're impacting and the power structures at play. How are you all thinking about kind of the identity side here and like who is building them and who it's impacting?
I think Lane Reddick got into some like trouble, and I don't understand why, for like wrangling in identity politics or what was viewed as identity politics, but asking those kinds of questions. I think, and I won't say the Ethereum space or Ethereans or the Ethereum community is necessarily diverse, but like the blockchain community in a wider sense, I think actually is. Like, you know, Silicon Valley is incredibly, from an identity perspective, like homogenous, right? Could probably say that with like some authority. On the other hand, like the blockchain space is, you know, you find stuff popping up everywhere. Like there are genuine hubs in Singapore, in Thailand, all throughout Europe, all throughout North America, like Denver, right? And Latin America, right? So in that sense, I think it is extensive, but I think, should we worry about those things? Yeah, we should. Like, and to say that we need to close that question down because it's a meritocracy, like, I think that disturbs me a little.
I'll tackle this. I guess I think about the human element in two ways. One is around the inclusivity, diversity piece, and I came into this space as a political scientist. There were almost no political theorists or political activists or political operatives when I came into this space. There were also very few women, very few people that had expertise in communication, in leadership development. So diversity includes not just your identity, but also what kind of expertise, perspective, experience you've had. And I think just because we're better than Silicon Valley doesn't mean we should like start claiming the diversity inclusivity banner. Personally, I think it's good to recognize where we're succeeding, but I feel like because we're not just designing the internet or designing some new tech field, we're redesigning economic, social, power, political systems. Like, whoa, that's a lot of responsibility, that's a lot of power, and we need to be really thoughtful. So the way I'd go about it would be to think first and foremost about users and global users, and how deeply are we using human-centered design in everything we're doing, and how close are we to the human beings we say need this technology. And also in our own companies, who's there? Very much so, who are the human beings that are actually writing the code? And are designers and engineers connecting in a human way? Do they really hear each other because they speak different languages? Do we have translators? Like, there's just so much to say about this. It could be its own panel.
I was going to ask at some point, well, then what shall we do? But then you went ahead and started answering that. And the first answer was user-centered design and the composition of the teams, and how they understand each other's different perspectives. I especially think the user-centered design part has, for obvious understandable reasons, been severely lacking until now. And if you don't do that, then instead you do like self-centered design, and that means designing for people who are just like you. So I think that's also, as well as for this reason, it's also better for commercial and impact reasons in general.
Completely.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Go, Bill.
Well, yeah, just sort of a slightly different human element is, well, this is the first time that I've met my whole team at this conference. I mean, we've been working together for like years.
Wow.
And so
Awesome.
that's the power of remote, but also
That's interesting.
bringing it back physical and having the apps help induce that.
And just to add, like, it really makes a vast, tangible difference if you hire people from different backgrounds with different life experiences, right? One example, we were using at one point, our website was still very much Web 2.0, and we had Google Capture on there. And when Wave, came on board, he's like, hey, that doesn't work in China. Like, all the people you're trying to reach, the 1.3 billion people that live there, like, it doesn't work. Like, Google Capture's, like, outlawed, right? And we're like, oh, right, yeah, thanks. And, like, they've been there for 6 months. Like, and there you go. Like, bam, right? Here's someone who actually knows some stuff because he comes from a different background to all the people who live in, like, Helsinki.
Yeah, I agree. Got to think about the who and identity as well. I don't know if is there a mic in the crowd? It doesn't look like it. Does anybody let's find time for one question if someone has a question. If you want to come up, if you don't, I'll ask one final question. Oh yeah, come up. / yell it out loud and I can repeat it. Yeah. Yeah, cool.
Okay,
So
repeat
let
that
me,
back,
let me
Rhys.
I'm going to repeat it back. Yeah, exactly. So the macro question, thank you, is also for our live stream viewers. The macro question is, how should we think about governance, especially with these when you think about the kinds of institutions that exist in the world, there are like nation states, and those have good governance systems, like companies, and we already know how those are governed. And now we think about these
Did you just say they have good
know.
governance
Sorry.
systems?
We understand they have solid. We know what their governance systems look like, or they've been worked on for a
Thank
while.
you, Zuka.
Yeah, sorry. And so ones that we have less clarity on are how to govern these new open source software projects and these new protocols. And the specific question here is, how do you balance something like, hey, let's just let the crowd decide, versus something like, hey, there's this unique set of like really passionate people that have a lot of domain expertise. Maybe let's let them decide. So how do you think about governance for these platforms in general?
There was a panel on Ethereum governance, which I thought was just fascinating in and of itself. So there's like, so we haven't really talked about, in that sense, what Aragon are doing. There's also another platform which I really like. It's not live yet, Colony. I think they're here. Some of the guys from that team, and getting decentralized governance off the ground is really difficult. But I think you can finally do it now that you have those like token incentive models, and that makes it so fascinating because it finally means that all those stakeholders are finally taken into account, right? Because at the moment, you basically ignore a lot of people through traditional governance models. Like, whether it's the government, you're like, okay, let's just ignore most people here because we can't fit them all in a building. It's really inconvenient to get them in one place. And anyway, how do we do that, right? It's actually really archaic, right? Corporate governance structures, again, same issues. So finally, like all those little micro things that people do can be taken into account in some way. One issue with that is that what you don't want to do is to monetize everything, right? Actually, that behavioral economics tells us, like, there's a warning caveat on that, which is that you could really undermine natural human behavior by monetizing it, because suddenly people don't want to do it if they're not getting paid. And that's a problem in and of itself.
I guess I'll say I love this question. I kind of want to, again, take it a little bigger, which is that there's developmental psychology around ethics, which is pretty widely accepted, which says that there's kind of 3 core stages of development, of ethical development. And the first is independent, or they call it preconditional, and that's where you're focused on the self. The second is dependent, where you're focused on kind of society, right? This is the stage we're in, I'd say, where there's, central authorities are making rules about what's right and wrong, and they're creating law. And the third, which I don't think as a civilization we've actually really hit, which is interdependent, which is post-conventional, and it's focused on, mutual respect. So my hope would be that actually cryptocurrencies and blockchain challenge us to figure out what are the ethics of interdependence? Like, how do we actually have an ethics that integrates the individual and the collective? I don't think we've really seen that. So answering the question of how we do it, I feel like it's so, that is the question. But I don't think we have an answer, and I think we're at the forefront of that evolution as a culture, as a society, and that's exciting.
It is exciting. So with that, excitement. Go ethically build your things, and let's thank our panelists one final time.